We're now living in an era where the sun is setting on the west and rising in the east.
Da li se ona završila?
We have a double standard that runs through all of our international affairs. Blood of some people is more valuable than the blood of others.
Zašto je u Evropi u redu da se naruši integritet Srbije?
Your own culture, which is unique actually. Your written language, your Cyrillic. None of that would be allowed if you joined the European Union.
Političke krize u Evropi.
As to the Ukraine, it can only end in a Russian victory. That will be very soon, I think.
Britanski parlamentarac, aktivni političar i dalje u Velikoj Britaniji, novinar, kao što vidimo i pisac, večera samo za publiku Rubikona, gospodin Džordž Galovej.
Pleasure to be here.
Prvo pitanje za vas, gospodine Galovej. Zašto je u Evropi u redu da se naruši integritet Srbije, a nije u redu da se naruši integritet Ukrajine?
Well, of course, there's a double standard in the world. Some countries are allowed to unilaterally separate themselves from their mother country and others are not. So, for example, Crimea is not allowed to decide that it's Russian, but the so-called Kosovo is allowed to declare itself separate from Serbia, its motherland. And it's not only allowed to do so, it is instantly recognized by most, but not all, of the NATO powers, and to be immediately admitted into international fora, international competitions, and so on. And the reason is it's a double standard. We have a double standard that runs through all of our international affairs, as we're seeing in the difference between the world's response to Ukraine and Gaza, for example. You can be sure that the blood of some people is more valuable than the blood of others. The sovereignty of some people is more valuable than the sovereignty of others. It's a big game. They called it, for a time, the rules-based international order, basically hinging on the Chicago Doctrine of Tony Blair and Bill Clinton back in 1999, the so-called responsibility to protect and so on. But now, they've stopped talking about that because they are so brazenly breaking the rules that nobody wrote down in the first place and proving them to be not worthy of the paper they're not written on. Who made these rules? How does one influence them? How does one change them? What legitimacy do they have? And they applied that doctrine to Serbia, to former Yugoslavia. And they did so not for the reasons stated, but for American imperial reasons. Yugoslavia was always a bone that stuck in their throat, and they were determined to see it broken up. They were determined to see the last remnants of it, even. Serbia, Montenegro, broken up. And then they were determined that Serbia should bow the knee to them and be a country just like theirs, which is effectively not a country at all. The Western countries are not sovereign, they're not independent. They are in the grip of what I call globalized capitalism, and that globalization extends all the way to personal pronouns, to lifestyle, to smoking, to foreign policy, everything. They wanted Serbia to bow the knee to them on all these matters and many, many more. And when the Serbs seemed disinclined to do that, for a whole raft of historical, religio, political, economic reasons, well, Serbia became the bad guy.
Može li se stav Velike Britanije prema Kosovu promijeniti u nekom trenutku?
I doubt it. Tony Blair was instrumental in the disaster that overcame your country and its forced partition and its transformation of a part of its national territory into effectively a NATO military base, a NATO stan. And Blair was crucial to that. And Blair is very much still in control of British politics. He retired from the number 10 Downing Street more than 15 years ago, but both of the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition are essentially Tony Blair acolytes. So they receive directly or indirectly his master's voice, and his master would consider his role in the creation of what they call Kosovo as being central to his political legacy. So I would think the whole world will change before the United Kingdom does.
Šta je opravdanje za pritisak na Srbe u Republici Srpskoj, kao što je ova rezolucija o genocidu u Srebrenici?
Well, they have a thing about Serbs, you see, and they want to create new stories, new scandals, new pressure on Serbia. When the Chinese president came here on his triumphant visit, this was, a thorn in the eye for them. They have painted China as an enemy. And here is this enemy in the heart of Europe, right next door to European Union countries. And he's getting a hero's welcome. And he's making all kinds of deals with the Serbian government, infrastructural deals, higher educational deals, and no doubt finding common ground on foreign policy also, and military cooperation also. So the next thing comes a new attack on Serbia in the United Nations. You could say this latest was an answer to the triumphant visit of Xi Jinping to Belgrade. So, of course, the consequences of the breakup of Yugoslavia, as I warned in the British Parliament at the time, have been disastrous for everyone. The blood that was shed and the blood that was taken, the blood that was given in such a breakup was inevitable and was discounted by those who sought the destruction of Yugoslavia. They deliberately conjured forth the ancient serpents of nationalism and religio-national fissures within the land of the Slavs, which had been dormant for quite some time. There were always people, of course, and the British at Bush House in the BBC Foreign Service had a whole section devoted to the breakup of Yugoslavia. You might say, what was it that first attracted the British state to broadcasting in all the languages of the former Yugoslavia? Britain played a leading role in that breakup. And it played a leading role in the subsequent breakups and the construction of the Kosovo myth. So when you ask me what's the reason for it is they don't like the independence of Serbia. They don't like independent people. They want everyone to worship the same globalized masters. And because the Serbian people, in their great majority, are not prepared to bow the knee to that, well, they have to be endlessly calumnized.
Da li se Evropa odnosi korektno, humano, odnosno jednako svojim standardima prema palestinskim žrtvama u pojasu Gaze?
Well, the 7.5 months now of what the ICJ, the highest court in the world, plausibly defined as genocide, would indicate that the Western powers again are employing a gigantic double standard here. There is no other country in the world that would be permitted without sanction and indeed endlessly rewarded despite carrying out war crimes and crimes against humanity to the border, if not over the border, of genocide, the ultimate crime in human society. It's how it was described at Nuremberg. So the 150,000 people who have been either killed, mutilated, maimed, wounded in a cage. I mean, Gaza is a cage. That's what Prime Minister David Cameron called it in 2010. Now he's the foreign minister, and he is actually assisting those who are massacring the people inside the cage that he described as a cage only 14, 15 years ago. So the British and the United States in particular are with Netanyahu to the end. The end might not be that far distant, and it may be also the end of Joe Biden's presidency and the end of Rishi Sunak's prime ministership. And if so, the issue of Gaza, Palestine, and double standards are going to play a major part in the result. Joe Biden in particular has destroyed his presidency over this question. And Donald Trump would have been even worse. It's really, as I always put it, two cheeks of the same ass in the United States and in the United Kingdom. Other parts of Europe are beginning to show some independence. So in the last week or so, Spain, Ireland, Norway all recognized the Palestinian state. Slovenia is about to do so. The French president said that if Netanyahu comes, he will have to be arrested per the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant, which is, of course, applicable across all the members of the court, of which France is certainly one, and even the Germans, who have been the most slavishly pro-Israel over this last crisis. Even they have said that Netanyahu will be arrested if he comes to Germany. So other parts of Europe are beginning to revolt against the Biden line. So I suspect that the last two men standing will be Uncle Sam and his little nephew, John Bull. But things are moving in a very seismic way in world public opinion. 8 months ago, Israel was rather a popular country in the world. 8 months later, any right-thinking person would want nothing to do with them.
Šta mislite o izjavama ministara Evropske unije, spoljnih poslova, o uvođenju sankcija Izraelu zbog nepoštovanja odluka suda?
This is the first time that this has ever happened. As I said, Israel has done all this without sanction. You could say other countries, like you could argue Russia and Ukraine, for example, but they are then immediately sanctioned. Hundreds of billions of their assets are frozen. No one can supply weapons to them. No one can buy their oil or gas. But in the case of Israel, far more egregious crimes are being committed on camera and being watched in real time. And not only has there been no sanction, but there has been endless reward. Britain supplies weapons and weapons components. Britain flies military spy flights from Cyprus over the Gaza Strip. And presumably, the government won't tell us, even me as a member of parliament, I'm not allowed to know, never mind the public. If I ask that question, the answer is, I will not tell you. But the 200 spy flights, 1,000 hours of air miles, were presumably to help Israel with its targeting, with its genocidal assault on Gaza. The Americans are not just giving all the weapons known to man to fuel this genocide, but they're giving money that would make your eyes water in a country that is already on its knees. The United States, if you look at the levels of poverty, the levels of homelessness, levels of student indebtedness, infrastructure degradation, bridges fall down, railway tracks derail, trains full of toxic materials, the highways that when we were kids, we used to look at in awe on television, 6-lane, 8-lane, 10-lane highways are now potholed as if the United States Air Force had just bombed them. And yet they're sending eye-wateringly large sums of money in the hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine and Israel, to the detriment of their own society, to the impoverishment of their own people. So, to answer your question, the fact that the European Union is now, finally, 150,000 dead and wounded later, saying that they will have to consider sanctions. Well, your show is called the Rubicon. This is a crossing of the Rubicon. And it's been very slow in coming, but of course it's welcome.
Velika tema je bila u Evropi i ostala tema Bregzita. Koji je uzrok Bregzita, a koje su posljedice?
Well, I was one of the leaders of the campaign for Brexit. I strongly believed in it, and I believe in it still, but I pointed out throughout the campaign that Brexit was necessary but not sufficient. It was necessary to do it, but it would not be sufficient only to do it. It was necessary if Britain was going to have the right to be an independent country, like Serbia, if we were going to have the right to our own foreign policy that wasn't dictated by von der Leyen or Borrell, if we were going to have the right to our own economic policy. For example, there's a major crisis now with British steel. It's ironic that Britain is going around the world threatening war with everyone, but doesn't have a steel industry. A war party without a steel industry is a contradiction in terms. Now, Brexit gives us the right, I would argue responsibility, to subsidize and fund our own steel industry and build it up for strategic as well as economic reasons. Thousands of jobs are being lost in the steel industry and in the supply chain. Thanks to Brexit, if we had a government that was prepared to do it, we could save our steel industry. We could force our public sector to buy vehicles manufactured in Britain. We could force the foreign-owned railway companies, including the French state, by the way. It's quite bizarre. We privatized our railways, but most of them are owned by the French state railway. How about that? But we could force them to manufacture their rolling stock in Britain. We could make economic preference, a buy British preference that would begin to rebuild our manufacturing base, our industrial base, which was once the wonder of the world and is now a mere shadow of its former self. And above all, we could have set sail in the world with no automatic enemies, with no automatic friends, with no entanglements, with no obligations, and tried to have a global Britain. Instead, despite Brexit, we are following the foreign policy of other countries, mainly the United States, but often also the European Union. We are not intervening in the economy in a way that would save our jobs, save our manufacturing capacity, and rebuild it. So, in a sense, we've got the worst of both worlds. We have Brexit, but we're not using Brexit, so what was the point of Brexit? So, me and the party I lead, the Workers' Party of Britain, we believe in an independent, sovereign Britain that is independent of the United States, independent of the European Union, and seeking to make the British brand more palatable around the world. And in the upcoming British general election, that's the policy on which we're fighting.
Kakav je slučaj sa albanizacijom Velike Britanije i koje su posljedice tog procesa?
We have, for example, an absolute crisis of illegal immigration coming across the English Channel, organized by criminal gangs, many, if not most of them, Albanian, and at least 40% of the people on board the rubber boats are Albanians. And the second biggest component part is Vietnam. There has not been a war in Albania since 1945. They cannot be repressed because Albania is a candidate member of the European Union and of NATO. So one must presume it has a government that is perfectly respectable. So if not war, if not repression, in what sense are these Albanians coming across the channel? In what sense are they refugees? They, first of all, are leaving from war-torn France, and in any case, they are from Albania, which has no war and no repression. So this is a real problem. We are looking at record numbers this summer. Now, you might legitimately ask, where is the Royal Navy? Why can't the Royal Navy turn back these boats? The answer is the Royal Navy is in the Red Sea, in the Black Sea, in the South China Sea. The Royal Navy is in everybody else's sea except our sea. And therefore, nobody is turning these back. And the British government is going to pay a very high political price for this because it's been year after year after year. And in Britain, unlike some other countries, the people who arrive, thank God, safely, because a lot of people drown in the English Channel, but the people who arrive safely are immediately put into hotels. And all over the country, there are hotels that are full of people who arrived on rubber boats across the Channel. This, while there are many British people without homes, many British veterans, for example, begging on the streets and without homes, but we have tens, scores of thousands of people in hotel rooms. The hotel owners are very happy with this. They get £80 per night, per person, forever, because the backlog of dealing with these cases runs into many years. So if you make it to the beach at Dover, you will be stuck in a hotel room and you will be at the expense of the British workers for an indeterminate time that will definitely be years and might be for decades. This is clearly foolish. I'm against mass immigration. I'm against it because it impoverishes the country from which they came. And as the leader of a workers' party, I'm against it because it puts downward pressure on wages and upward pressure on services for the workers that are already in Britain, of whatever colour they are, wherever they came from, however they pray, as we say. So it's a major problem. And Albanian crime in London is now so prevalent, they're making movies about it. It's a phrase I shall have to get used to, the Albanization of Britain.
Migrantska kriza, da li se ona završila ili tek ćemo da vidimo posljedice svega toga?
The crisis is increasing. It's mounting. The summer months always bring a vast increase in the number of attempted crossings. There's nobody to stop them. The French don't stop them, even though Britain gave France billions of pounds to stop them. Nobody tries to stop them. You know, these dinghies are there all along the beach. Someone could go along with a screwdriver and burst them all before they can set off, but nobody does. As I've told you, the Navy is definitely not going to turn them back because it's too busy bombarding the Yemenis in the Red Sea, or threatening the Chinese in the South China Sea, or trying to create World War III in the Black Sea. So it's going to intensify, and the political consequences of it are going to multiply. I must say, it is a testament, if you'll forgive me blowing my own people's trumpet, it is a testament to the good nature of the British people that all these foreigners are living in hotels at their expense indeterminately, and there are virtually no examples of any unwelcoming behaviour by the British people. And thank God for that, because social peace could be potentially endangered by such a problem growing and growing within the country.
Šta možemo da očekujemo od izbora za Evroparlament koje tek slede?
Well, we're no longer concerned with these elections, of course. I don't know how they're going to go. I suspect that the trend that we've seen in recent elections across the European mainland will be maintained and increased. That is to say, forces, they're called right-wing or even far-right, although they turn out like Meloni to be NATO puppets in any case. They're called far-right until they're elected, and then they are immediately embraced by NATO and they do what they're told. But I suspect that these kind of parties and formations will continue to grow. In the Netherlands, for example, the centre proved incapable of holding. I suspect the same will be true in France, that the centre cannot hold. And because of the absence of a real challenge from people like me in most countries, people who define themselves as socialist, then it will be the parties that define themselves as right-wing or nationalist that will pick up seats. There are some key players in the European Parliament, like Claire Daly, for example, in Dublin, that I have a desperate, vital wish to see her re-elected. She's been one of the very few. She's like Joan of Arc in that European Parliament. But for the most part, for most of the public in the European Union, they don't even know who their members of the European Parliament are. They care even less, and they vote in very, very small numbers indeed.
Koliko su ti izbori slika i prilika sukoba neoliberalne I konzervativne politike?
I think, as I say, I wouldn't describe the dichotomy exactly as you have. I'd say it's the globalists versus the nationalists, I would say. And I speak as neither a globalist or a nationalist. I would say that many people vote for characters like Wilders, Meloni, the former National Front in France, Le Pen, and formations like that. And that looks like, a swing to the far right, but I think that masks the fact that most sensible people look at the European Union, NATO, globalism, and they don't like it. So who are they going to vote for? Who is standing against that? Now, in France, slightly different. You have Mr. Mélenchon, who would be broadly, no, not entirely, broadly, of my point of view. You have a new force arising in Germany that would be broadly, of my point of view, led by Sarah Wagenknecht, which is a break from Die Linke. It's running at about 15% in the polls in Germany for the European Parliament elections. So there's some sign of people who are not far right, but are anti-globalist, beginning to get to their feet and get some support, some momentum. But for the most part, if you don't like von der Leyen, Mr. Borrell, Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, the WEF, the NATO, WHO, and all the other globalist paraphernalia, if you don't like them, who are you going to vote for? It usually ends up that you end up voting for nationalist parties that are, in some cases, quite unpleasant.
Šta bi bio izlaz iz političke krize u Evropi?
I don't believe so, because I don't believe they have an alternative program. And I give Meloni as an example again. What is the difference between Meloni's economic policy, foreign policy, and the centrists that she overthrew? There is no difference at all. She's not leaving the European Union. She's not leaving the euro. She's not able to stop the boats which come to Italy, even larger numbers than they come to England. She fully backs NATO in the war against Russia. She fully backs Israel in the war against Gaza. In what sense is she different from the people that she succeeded? And I believe that Le Pen would be the same. They have radical rhetoric which is differential to the prevailing orthodoxy, but the rhetoric doesn't match their actions. They have no program. They are stuck in exactly the same paradigm of neoliberal economics and neoconservative foreign policy that the others in the center ground are. So they paint their faces in the colors of something different, but actually they wipe that paint off quite quickly after being returned to office.
Kako možemo da očekujemo da će se završiti sukob u Ukrajini?
As to the Ukraine, it can only end in Russian victory. That will be very soon, I think, much sooner than people predict. And it will end with the realization of Russia's war aims, which is the complete neutralization of Ukraine, a NATO-free Ukraine, not just not in NATO, but NATO-free. No NATO connection whatsoever. A denazified and completely disarmed Ukraine, with, I suspect, significant territorial concessions. I don't expect the war to end without Odessa being a Russian city again. I don't expect the war to end with Ukraine, the rump of Ukraine, which will become a kind of Kosovo, having any access to the sea. I expect the entire coastline, right, including Transnistria, will all become parts of Novorossiya, as they call it, the new Russia. And the longer NATO succeeds in keeping the Ukrainian war going, the more costly it will be. You know, if the Turkish peace talks had not been wrecked by the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, presumably acting on orders from Washington, this war could have been over 2 months into the conflict. If only the Minsk II agreements had been implemented and observed as Germany and France guaranteed that they would be, this war would never have started in the first place. All the people that have died, all the money that has been wasted, all the devastation on Ukrainian society which has occurred with its millions of its people scattered around the globe, most of them never to return. This has been a very costly crime committed by NATO, using the bodies of Ukrainians to try to harm, if possible, to weaken and break up the Russian Federation. It's a spectacular failure. The Russian economy is booming. The Western economies are sinking. The consequences of the war for the West will be grave. The consequences of the war for Russia have been beneficial. It has cemented their relationship with China and has increased demand for the raw materials, the precious things which Russia has in abundance, and it's finding more and more of these precious things. So, as I said, the sun is rising in the east. Best go east, young man, and get some of the sunshine.
Prelazimo na Rubikon pitanje. Koliko je za Srbiju težak izbor između NATO-a i Europske unije i potencijalnog članstva u BRICS-u?
I don't interfere in Serbian politics at all. I have no side, I have no favorites, and I'm just a friend of your people. But if I was you, I would definitely turn back from crossing the Rubicon into the European Union. Joining the European Union, even if they allowed you, would require you to sacrifice a very great deal, not just of your territorial integrity. That would be, of course, a bitter pill to swallow, but it would have to be swallowed, or you would not be allowed to enter the European Union. And not just actually in relation to your neighbors, but your own culture. Your own culture, which is unique actually. Your written language, your Cyrillic, your religious affiliation, your fellow feeling with Russia, your smoking, your attitude to the family and family values. None of that would be allowed if you joined the European Union. Frankly, you'd become just another little member of the European Union. You would have no power, no influence in the European Union at all. No small country does. France and Germany dictate and determine everything that happens in the European Union. You would be a tiny dot on the spectrum of the European Union, but they would force major cultural, political, economic changes in how you run things here. You would not be allowed to run things here the way you currently run them. So if I were you, I wouldn't do that, especially when we're now living in an era where the sun is setting on the west and rising in the east. I mean, it's not as if, this is not 1990, when with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the still to emerge China, as Fukuyama put it, history had ended and his side had won. This is a completely different moment that we are at now. Most of the people and most of the wealth of the world are in the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Most of the people and most of the wealth are in the BRICS. The BRICS is the future. And I think you're in a really good situation. You have friendly relations with Russia, increasingly friendly relations with China. Russia and China are more or less joined at the hip, and you're their friend. That could be a big win-win for Serbia. So if I were you, I'd keep my independence, I'd keep my family values, I'd keep my religion, I'd keep my language, and I'd keep my smoking rules. That would be my advice as a friend of Serbia.
We are on the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, lads.
It's very interesting. Hvala što ste gledali još jednu našu emisiju. Zapratite kanal emisije Rubikon. Kao što vidite, trudimo se da donesemo mišljenja iz čitavog sveta. Ono što očekujemo od vas jeste da delite naše sadržaje na društvenim mrežama, komentarišete, jer svrha ovoga što mi radimo jeste da svi zajedno učinimo sve što možemo, da kockice istorije padnu na nama povoljnu stranu.